Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Rima, and I'm a Senior Program Manager with Team Community. I would like to thank the organizers of Palestine Digital Activism Forum, all the volunteers, and thank you so much for creating this space and for bringing us all together today. Um, today, we're going to discuss a topic that we have discussed here in this event with a focus on Palestine previously, and we're hoping today to bridge and to create connections between different countries and populations which were affected by discriminatory social media policies. I'm really honored to be joined today by three amazing digital rights activists and organizers. Mona Shtaya, Palestinian digital rights defender and advocacy advisor for Hamle. Carolina, executive director at the Colombian Civil Society Digital Rights Organization Charisma. And Irfat, a scholar, filmmaker, and journalist from Kashmir. Today we have really just a few minutes. We have really little time to discuss really important intersections uh, that different civil society digital rights organizations have been documenting when it comes to the impact of discriminatory social media companies' policies, especially when it comes to occupied populations and marginalized populations, bringing from different experiences coming from Palestine, from Colombia, and Kashmir. Would like to start first with Mona, uh, starting with if you can now like guide us through. There's been like really a lot to say, but for those who are not familiar with the history of how Palestinian voices have been frequently and in various ways silenced. Yeah, if you can share with us, Mona, how social media content moderation policies contributed to silencing free speech and Palestinian voices.
Thank you, Rima. Thanks all for joining us today in the Palestine Digital Activism Forum. So basically, Palestinians, like social media platforms and Palestinians, like it's a long story. It didn't start recently. Like it started since the social media platforms started, but basically it was highlighted and decentralized last year in May with the May uprising because like Palestinian voices were silenced in a very unusual way, or it was surprising for all of the people. Also, it came as a result of the escalations on the ground. So it was like an extension because we define digital rights as an extension of a human rights in the digital spaces. So the human rights violations on the ground were escalating, and thus the digital rights violations were also escalating. So we documented around 500 cases of digital rights violations in just 2 weeks in Palestine. And this is what we at Hamle have documented. But also there are many other cases, hundreds or thousands of cases that we did not manage to document in Hamle because like we are small organizations and we are trying to document based on our limited resources. But basically that means, or how is that affecting our voices? Basically it's affecting or our narrative. It's affecting this kind of digital narrative that we Palestinians have. We all know that since the occupation started, they are trying like to test new tools and try to expand their tools. And since 2010 they were trying, or even before, they were trying to expand to a new platforms. Basically social media platforms were part, and this kind of digital militarism for the social media platforms was like it was developed year by year, and based on that, they developed also tools to suppress Palestinian voices. Such in 2015, the Israeli government, they started the Israeli cyber unit, which basically is trying to monitor and silence Palestinian voices through sending requests, systematic requests to the social media platforms to take down the Palestinian content. In 2016, they sent around 2,400 requests, while like it was increasing till 2019, they sent more than 20,000 requests to the social media companies. And when we are saying a request, it doesn't mean like one piece of content. It could include hundreds of posts and tweets to the social media companies. And based on what the Israeli cyber unit said, they said that the social media companies accepted most of those cases. That means that our narrative and our social media content, basically, which is documenting the human rights violations that we are exposed to on the ground, is being taken down from these platforms, and this is affecting our narrative. It also affects the investigation of the human rights violations and crimes that we Palestinians are exposed to on the ground. That said, that means that social media platforms are having like this doesn't mean that all of these, because sometimes there is a claim that this is a violation of the community standards, but based on our work and because we are escalating these pieces to the social media companies, we were able to restore many of those posts and tweets. That means that those cases are false positive, and thus they are not violating the community standards of the social media platforms. Therefore, social media platforms should rethink how they should moderate their content. And because of that, we believe in Hamle and the intersectional approach in our advocacy, in digital advocacy, so we can put more pressure on the social media companies to stop their biased algorithms and biased content moderation policies when it comes to the occupied people narratives and to marginalized communities around the world.
Thank you so much, Mona. We're going to move with Carolina. Carolina, we would like to share with us today, also coming back actually around the same time. It was like a moment like in May 2021 with the protest in Colombia and witnessing a lot of content take down. Can you share with us more, maybe also with a status update on how like the protest and free speech in Colombia has been silenced on social media?
Thank you very much, Rima, for this opportunity to talk about the situation and make bridges with many other regions in the world. So, as you've said, we had an uprising protest at the end of April last year, but probably we have to start looking what happened before. So 2019, there was a lot of protests that is spread around Latin America. Remember Chile, Puerto Rico, Ecuador, Colombia. There was a distress on a social distress around the region that was somehow frozen by the pandemic. The pandemic had this effect of frozening the social distress in our region and kind of leave it for later. Back in 2020, by September in 2020, there was a situation of police abuse in Bogota that brought to another uprising. Just when the pandemic was starting to be a bit more mild, this turned out into several days of violence in Bogota that ended up with situations of very violent confrontation between police and unarmed protesters, killing several of them. And that was again frozen by the pandemic situation. Then in April, when the pandemic had already been for over a year and the social distress continued there was an uprising, especially in Cali, Colombia. That's another city, about I would say 2 or 3 million people in Colombia, But it was the difference here, or probably how we can characterize this, it was a youth protest, mostly urban and male. This is why the social network became so important, because if on top of the pandemic, you realize that it was among people mostly connected via cell phones, these put us in a very different situation than that protests that we have lived before. Most protests in Colombia would have been mainly rural, or by workers or other kind of people. Here we had especially male protesters in the urban places of Colombia, and many of them the marginalized population, young people that had no study, no employment, and after many months of pandemic were really suffering the situation. So the protest started, and when this happens, and along with a lot of violence, and the police started exercising, law enforcement started exercising violence and using extreme force to prevent the protest. The cell phones became the main tool for protesters. Also, many people that were afraid of pandemic were getting informed via social networks. So there was a kind of an interesting cohesion of things. During the first days, there was a lot of over removal of content, and many people were protesting also against the social networks, with some consequences such as that Mona just explained. Since the content were violent and were explaining, we're giving evidence of law enforcement violence, the removal of this content was also a threat against the possibility of proving human rights problems. Apart from that, during the first week, during the second week of the protests, Instagram had a problem. That's what they said. There was a problem on the Instagram moderation content function that affected especially first Colombia, and then some groups in United States that from indigenous communities that were protesting also, and it went to Palestine. The Instagram explained that this was something all over the world, but the numbers that we saw was mainly focused on places where protests were happening. So there was, for us, certainly a bias. We had a good response by Instagram when we see how this was affecting specifically this social network. We contacted, because I have also to say that social networks, at least in Colombia, had when the situation started, they put up something like a help desk to open direct channels with organizations such as Carisma that could present fast some situations, such as what happened with Instagram. They reacted, and in few hours things were solved on the platform, but also we could realize that this affected especially places where protests were taking place. I believe that one of the main things that happened here, and we will talk about that later, is the lack of transparency on the fact that social network or platforms are taking actions during these times of uprising, but it's not clear what kind of actions they are taking. And afterwards, there are no transparency reports that could tell us what happened and allow us to have some learning process on what happened with a media that became so important for people to express themselves. I will leave it here so that we can continue talking later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carolina. And for sure, we heard the word error, like a lot of the times there were errors. A lot of coincidental errors, especially when it comes to occupied and indigenous populations. Moving now with the fact that also around October 2021, opposition in Kashmir, especially diaspora, have been reporting a lot of takedowns and silencing of dissident voices. Would you like to tell us more about it, and also maybe walk us through other, like the history of discriminatory social media company policies for Kashmir, for folks and users in Kashmir?
Thank you so much, Rima. I have so much to relate to what Mona and Carolina just said. It feels like it's the same story everywhere. Maybe the geographies and the people are different, but the operation is literally the same. It feels like they use the same kind of rule book. And before I literally jump into my thing, I just want to say, as much as we would like to believe that internet was created as a tool to empower us, empower the masses, if anything, it has only empowered the authoritarian governments and the big tech platforms. They are becoming more and more powerful, and we are becoming more and more powerless. So for the audience here, I don't know if you know, but Kashmir, that's where I am from, it has been under India's illegal occupation for more than 7 decades now. As a result of that, physical spaces have systematically been choked due to intense militarization. There is 1 soldier for every 30 civilians in Kashmir, and that's the highest. That's a higher civilian soldier ratio than wartime Afghanistan. So in Kashmir, I want to go a little bit back in the history. It's not something new. The takedowns, the internet bans, the censorship, the surveillance. It's not new. It's as old as the use of internet in Kashmir. So, which was right around 2008 when internet became really common. People started using it more on their computers, on their cell phones, and it was not just restricted to what's called internet cafes, like we used to go back in the day. So in Kashmir, the internet did not only have the use of connecting long lost friends, overcoming geographical barriers, because if you look at the geography of Kashmir, it's like that perfect example of a panopticon. There are mountainous and geographical barriers dividing different regions of Kashmir from one another, people from one another, and it also makes the control for India very easy. And there is very heavy military deployment. So internet actually helped people connect with long lost friends or other Kashmiris in other parts of the world. It was also helping them to create these alternative spaces where they could meet each other, listen to each other's thoughts, vent their anger, share their grief, mobilize or organize protests. So you remember that Facebook has this, I think it still has, I don't use Facebook anymore, but it has this feature, what's on your mind. It actually opened new windows of self-expression for otherwise silenced people in Kashmir. So in the early days of Facebook and Twitter in Kashmir, the ability to maintain connections online when they were so difficult to make physically, because you have to understand in Kashmir, physical gatherings are restricted. So this was a joy until surveillance, censorship, frequent internet bans, and even physical arrests and harassment based on online activities became a reality. So there's a lack of openness to discuss social moments in offline public spaces in Kashmir. Like I said, of course there's occupation, physical spaces are restricted, everybody is scared to say something against India and not end up in jail. But the increased visibility of Kashmiris on these social networks also led to increased choking of these spaces. For example, internet bans, deplatforming. If you're in Kashmir, you can even get arrested for writing something on Twitter, on Facebook, which is critical of India's occupation in Kashmir. And after that comes self-censorship. If I see my friend getting arrested for writing something on Twitter, I'm just going to make sure that I don't say anything at all. I keep myself super low so that I don't get arrested. And I personally have been deplatformed. So many of my friends and so many online news outlets, diaspora organizations like Stand with Kashmir, other friends, like the account for my podcast, we all have been deplatformed. Some of us got our accounts back, some didn't. The whole point is to go forward with this erasure of Kashmiris from online spaces, so that this we can send a notion out that everything is fine in Kashmir. And Indians like to say, Kashmir is an integral part of India. So social media platforms have become important in terms of local and international discussions, which has also led to concerns on freedom of expression. Therefore, the attacks and attempts of silencing actors in political conflicts has also increased. Like Carolina and Mona, you were just talking about. But this has also forced them into non-participation or triggering platform policies to remove controversial speech. For example, in Kashmir, it has triggered an entire population of activists, journalists, civil society actors into non-participation. I personally do not use Twitter anymore. Like I have pinned a tweet and said that I am not going to tweet anymore. I hope that I won't be harassed anymore. I have been trolled. I have been doxxed. I have been harassed. And I have been deplatformed. So, but a time came when it was like leading to offline repercussions for me, and I had to like sort of say goodbye to the space. So the extent of internet censorship really varies from country to country, but it's also reflective of its state of democracy. One of the many myths in cyberspace is that internet is an inherently emancipatory tool. It's this device that promotes democracy by giving voice to people who lack power. However, in Kashmir, if anything, the internet and big tech platforms have only helped India to further its control and silence Kashmiri voices. Last year, in 2021, in March, both of my Twitter accounts, my personal account, the account for my podcast, they were suspended. But it did not come as a shock to me. The Twitter accounts for influential activist group like Stand with Kashmir and other Kashmiri advocacy and activism accounts, they were already suspended right around like the time like my accounts got suspended. But I was literally getting emails from Twitter for a week, for a week, for a year, that I am violating India's Technology Act and India is asking them to pull down my accounts. But what is bizarre is when my accounts were suspended, the emails I received from Twitter, they stated that my accounts had been suspended because my tweets engage in platform manipulation and spam. To be clear, I neither spam nor manipulate the platform. My Twitter feeds are opinionated but informative. But still, my accounts were suspended. Basically, accounts like mine, Kashmiri activists, journalists, scholars, anyone who is critical of India's occupation in Kashmir, our accounts get mass reported by right-wing Hindutva trolls. And Twitter has no mechanism in place to validate or investigate these false reports. Like most social media websites, Twitter relies on user reports to identify abusive behavior. These mechanisms are easily manipulated. When a group of users wants to harass or silence voices that they do not like, they work together to report content that they want to silence. And some platforms refer to this behavior as brigading. It's better understood as a user-based censorship or harassment, and it works. I hope I'm not out of time, but I'm going to continue. I want to talk a little bit about platform moderation. I want to talk a little bit about content moderation here. So we have to understand, for example, platforms like Facebook, their content moderation mostly happens in Philippines. They hire these third-party companies where these people work in countries like Philippines day and night, and they moderate content. For example, for an artist in the US, if she's drawing a nude picture of somebody, it's art for her. And if she uploads it to Facebook, and the guidelines that the content moderators in Philippines receive, it's nudity to them. So they are going to flag it, and Facebook is going to say, oh, this violates our platform rules, so we are going to put it down. So there's always like these different kinds of barriers. Like there are different rules, and first and foremost, there are not really enough content moderators. So sometimes like most of the times, it's AI that does it. And then even these people in Philippines or any other part of the world, they do it. There's like language barriers. Like look at what happened to Rohingyas in Myanmar. And at that point, Facebook hardly had any content moderators who could speak that language. Literally an entire genocide was carried out, ethnic cleansing was carried out, and Facebook has such a big part in it. I would say it facilitated it because it didn't do a good job at it. So we talk a lot about the implications of internet, its use in general, whether it's empowering the citizens or it's empowering the authoritarian governments, whether it's a threat to civic power or whether it's not a threat to civic power. I was like literally battling with it, and I came across Rebecca McKinnon's book that she wrote in 2013. It's called Consent of the Network. I think she has tried to like address these questions somehow, given some examples from different parts of the world, and she has also tried to sort of bridge the two extremes by illustrating examples, like I said, from different parts of the world. So anyone who is interested to understand the process by which big tech companies like Google, Facebook, Twitter, how did they become so powerful and how are they now these powerful online public spheres, is very important to understand for us, because imagine the amount of power and control these companies have over people like us. So when we get shadow banned, when we get deplatformed, when we get silenced, there's literally very little that we can do, like a Kashmiri can do, a Palestinian can do individually. But imagine, like, if Carolina, me, Mona, like all of us, like dissidents and people who have been silenced and who are facing the brunt of authoritarianism and these companies and this silencing, if we all come together and try to sort of create tools, force the platforms to like change policies, I think that would be really amazing. So we have to Kashmiri voices have been silenced by mainstream media always. Like in 2019, August 5th, like when our autonomy was also taken away from us, if you go on this website called Media Cloud and you enter the keyword Kashmir, you will see that in August 2019, the spike goes up like that. Like everybody from New York Times to Washington Post, they started talking about Kashmir. And then towards the December of the same year, when 8 million people were still in the longest communication blockade ever, they were under intense militarization, the world had already forgotten about it, moved on. Nobody was writing stories about Kashmir or anything. So while our narrative gets silenced by big tech platforms who work hand in hand with the authoritarian government of India, on the contrary, narratives claiming Kashmir is an integral part of India, Kashmir issue is a terrorism issue, and India is a post-colonial state, have been widely promoted through the same platforms. Seldom heard other legitimate counter perspectives like Kashmir is not India's internal dispute, and it's not a law and order situation, but a powerful resistance movement for right to self-determination. And whenever Kashmiris tried to use the only space available to them through social media and voice their opinions, everything was done to curb the space that was helping them to tell their stories and locate themselves in the world. Indeed, part of India's strategy in silencing Kashmiris online and offline is in preventing these counter-framings about the legitimacy of Kashmiri struggle from receiving traction and media attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Asad, and thank you so much also for sharing your personal experience being a digital rights defender on social media. And I think like I really connect with you, and many people present today connect with you when it comes to how social media companies use different, uprising and use like the myth or the idea of them being emancipating and them being champions of freedom of expression, while different communities, including you and the communities you represent today, we have probably like connect more with them as companies, with them, having a relationship with civil society organizations based on market share logic, and being like more and more familiar in our narratives with surveillance capitalism and the business model of these companies, and where really, the value of freedom of expression stands, how many resources are really invested in protecting freedom of speech. We would like also today to talk more. I think like this is, if you are an activist or person trying to break into the field of digital rights, like you are following in your community cases of content takedowns and you want to do something about it. Wanna have you all, like Mona, Carolina, and Arta, share with us how have you been working to build visibility and momentum, as well as solidarity campaigns around the impact of the repressive policies of social media companies, and as well like how you've engaged with these companies to influence their policies. And we start with Mona.
A lot of questions.
You're breaking.
That,
sorry, Mona, you're breaking.
Can you hear me, guys?
Yeah, now. Yeah.
Okay.
Now,
perfect. Thank you. Okay, so as you guys mentioned, like it's the same story, but they are keep repeating it. Like in Kashmir, Myanmar, Western Sahara, Colombia, and other places around the world, because we are not like a big market for them. We can't affect their policies as Israel, for example. And therefore, when we are talking about engaging people and for organizing ourselves as advocacy people and as advocacy experts in this field, we usually think how we can connect our stories and think in an intersectional way when we are talking with the social media platforms. Basically, we usually aim to connect with people. Last year in May Uprising, when it started, first thing to do as one of our colleagues in the digital rights community, she suggested to introduce us to Carolina, who's in Colombia, and because their organization were also documenting what's happening with the indigenous people of Colombia there, and we had immediately a meeting with them. We were coordinating together. I felt we also have been like trying to coordinate together also through through conferences and through other platforms to speak together about our problems and to think together how we can platforms. So basically, when we are organizing to advocate against big tech companies, it's usually between having this kind of coordination on the local level and the regional level and also in the international level, keeping in mind how we can make much more intersectional approach. So we inform all of our partners, we educate them, we educate also our people, we tell them what is like the problem with their policies, because sometimes people like they know there is a problem, but we need to tell them where exactly is this problem in their policies. For example, when we are talking about like they are taking down posts when it contains like Hamas word, why they are taking that? Because it's with the DOI list, and because of that we are usually explaining that to our people and to our audience on the local, regional, and national level, and we are trying like to coordinate with other communities and marginal communities that are coordinate and put more pressure on the social media companies. On the other hand, when it comes to our communities, because we are like small markets to them.
Mona, you're breaking, sorry.
Yeah, I can't hear Mona too. Is everyone like hearing Mona breaking?
Yes, it
No,
is breaking out.
you're still breaking. Yeah, maybe we can, if it's okay, like maybe we can go like Carolina till like we like Mona.
Okay.
Maybe you can check your internet connection.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I would like to talk about probably 3 different layers that we're working on. So the first one is that internet connectivity is complex, right? And there are many intermediaries that participate in bringing us the capacity to be on the internet. And when there is an uprising, of course, most people go claim or are worried about the way that social media is doing the moderation and blocking their capacity to speak. But sometimes it is not the social media. Sometimes it goes to the connectivity itself. And it also happened in Colombia during this last uprising. We found that there were specific places, specific moments when many people was at the same time saying that they were having problems to connect to social media, to do streaming or to post pictures or whatever. And we were able to understand that the situation was very specific, and we did some research, and it also helped us that there was a report by NetBlocks commenting that in a specific night in Cali, there was a big problem with connectivity in Cali. And when we were able to identify that, do some research and put over the table that there were connectivity issues in places where law enforcement was, and we found that there were contracts that some law enforcement could had bought jamming jamming equipment to prevent the connectivity in certain places, and that they could use it during for citizen security. We were able also to explain to the people that this can also happen, and that's not necessarily social network, but it has another layer of complexity. because what we also find is that when we come with a lot of buzz, let's say, there is less capacity for us to engage with social network. So we have to say that during the protest, not just social network prevented or were problems with content moderation, but at the layer of connectivity, there were problems, and problems with no transparency. We never knew, at the end, we didn't know whether law enforcement used the jammers or not, but we were able to say there were specific problems, they had the capacity, and there's a legal framework that allowed them to do that. So when we are able to explain people, we started to understand better what the problems were, and we were able to identify and engage locally. That so first layer is with people. Second layer is with locally with the platforms, and provide them with information, and try to diminish the impact that content moderation and connectivity problems and so on have on the capacity of people to speak freely. I think that has helped a lot, but of course it's a lot of burden also over organizations such as Charisma, because then it ends up like, if we don't police, if we don't say, that's also a big problem. But since you are asking, how do we engage? And then because we're doing all this work and we were able to identify problems, we're also asking these corporations, these platforms, to, and not just the platforms, the government and so on, and the law enforcement, for transparency. Tell us what happened, because we can now say these are different problems and we want to know why, when, how, and so on. I think this has worked less, right? And then the third level is, of course, regional and international, just as Mona said. Then identifying what other organizations are doing this, how can we identify similar problems and look for solutions. And also at regional and international level, engage with companies and with other fora, such as the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, the Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression at OAS and at UN, etc., to present the problems and to stress the fact that during a social unrest, the interfering with internet, with the social network, is a human right violation. And therefore, there needs to be more transparency and commitment by corporations not to do that, just as for governments as well. I'll leave it there.
Can I jump in again?
Yes, please, Mona.
Yeah, so what I wanted to add is, last year, through our through the May uprising, what we really noticed that it was affecting our campaign and it was supporting us is talking to international mainstream media, because basically these tech companies are concerned about their reputation in the international mainstream media. So besides connecting and networking with other organizations and communities who are like from the local, regional, and international level, the international mainstream media really did a great job in covering the digital rights violations and silencing Palestinian voices, as well as the double standards that started since last February, when the Ukrainian-Russian war started. And we saw how tech companies like Meta and others, they took a very strict measures to protect Ukrainians because of the Ukrainian-Russian war. And when it comes to Kashmir, Colombia, or Palestine, they never did that. For example, they used, like, they allowed the hate speech against the former people and the politicians and the Russian politicians and president, in order to give the Ukrainian people the right to resistance. And the word resistance itself is the very reason why our content is being taken down for years now from their platforms. So they can use this word. They know what it means to use the word resistance, but they basically want to use it only with the Ukrainians. This kind of double standards, when they apply it, they also apply other kind of double standards. For example, they were labeling all the Russian state media outlets and for years now, we have been fighting propaganda, misinformation, and disinformation from the Israeli authorities, and from the Israeli propaganda, and they never took that into consideration, or they never took our recommendation on a serious matter. While when it comes to Russian-Ukraine war, they took that on a serious matter, and they adapt this very quickly. So the war started in 24th of February, and they adapted, and they started their blog in 26th of February. So less than 48 hours, they adapted all their content, all their policies. But when it comes to Palestinians, we've been speaking about that for years now, and they never took that on a serious matter. Like last May, when the international mainstream media was covering that, and they were covering how our voices have been suppressed, but also they covered that, to be honest, because influencers and celebrities were also talking about that, because there was a very obvious biased content moderation policies when it comes to our case, because also people were observing, and they saw the incitement, hate speech, and violence content from the Israelis basically published against Palestinians on their platforms, and those platforms, they never took it down. They never enforced it as they are doing with the Palestinian content. Because of that, we gained a lot of coverage from the international mainstream media, and as well as that started the social media platforms. They started to think more how they can engage more with us, and because of that, they started to have regular meetings with the regional and with the local, as well as with the international coalitions that we are part, and to talk more and to try to find a solution for their technical or continuous technical glitch for our marginalized communities and for the occupied people. So that said, that means that social media companies, when they want to take action, they can. When they have the will, they can do. But for our cases, obviously, they don't care. They don't want to take action, and they want us to still to keep talking about our or to keep suppressing our narrative all the time from their platforms. And this is really affecting our movements, our liberation movements, because today we are talking under the theme digital solidarity for justice. That said, we can't build our digital solidarity movement on the digital spaces, because they are restricting our work. They are preventing us from doing our jobs. They are preventing us from speaking about the suppression, about the human rights violations that we are exposed to. So yeah, that's from the Palestinian perspective, basically, but it's also intersectional with the other minorities and the other marginalized groups that we have been in contact with for a long time now.
Thank you so much, Mona. I hope we most folks heard you. From my side, the voice was breaking a little bit, but I just wanted to highlight that everything that Mona was saying, she actually wrote a brilliant piece, an article about it, basically the double standards, and covering the recent development with Ukraine, Russia, and from the perspective of Palestinian. Mona, if you would like to drop the link to your article in the chat, I think it would be a great resource for those attending today. Let's move now with Pat.
Thank you, Mona. Thank you, Carolina. Honestly, I completely resonate with what Mona was saying. But one thing that's not present in Kashmir is organizing and protest. That has been completely taken away from us. We had really huge uprisings in 2008 because people were able to organize on internet, and 9 and 10 and 2016. I think that was for the last time. And after that, they were small protests here and there, but then we were not really able to organize. And before even 2019, the internet ban that last 505 days, almost 2 years, the longest internet ban that we had was in 2016 summer, when there was a huge uprising going on in Kashmir. So over the years, Kashmiris have been completely silenced, and because they know the repercussions, the physical repercussions, ending up in jails, getting physically harassed and whatnot, people have chosen self-censorship. So there are not like really many people that you can even talk to and ask them, and who will be willing to talk to you and tell them, oh, like, why are you not on social media? Why is this happening and that happening? Because everybody is so much full of fear. Thousands of Kashmiris are in jails, including journalists and civil society activists and human rights activists for just doing their job, for speaking. And now what's left is just some online news platforms and some voices here and there, some in diaspora, some elsewhere. And even they are being targeted. Like, voices in diaspora are always being targeted, their page is pulled down, they are threatened, they are being threatened, harassed, trolled, like everything they can do in the physical world. And if nothing works, even families getting physically threatened in Kashmir. That why is your kid doing this and that? Like, they shouldn't be doing that. An indirect way of silencing everyone who wants to talk anything about Kashmir. Like, literally, even right now when I'm speaking it, I'm shivering. I'm like, okay, I hope that the consequences for this wouldn't be so bad, because there are literally very few voices left who can even talk about Kashmir because the repercussions are so bad. Um, so at this point, like I said, everybody has like self-censored themselves, and these online news platforms, like just last week there's this online news website called Free Press Kashmir in Kashmir, which does a good job of reporting what's happening in Kashmir. They are not, obviously they cannot, if they have to say, for example, imagine if Indian military killed 3 civilians somewhere, they would have to write the headline as Indian military allegedly killed 3 Kashmiris, and instead of saying they just killed it, because for them also the repercussions are like so hard. And in spite of that, their Instagram account was completely taken down by Instagram, and they kept like writing to them, eventually got it back. Like, it's so difficult for anyone to say anything about Kashmir and be visible. One big part of my work is also to work on this invisibility that has been enforced on us. So at this point, of course, like, I sort of want to piggyback on all of you and help with like whatever I know, and at the same time insert Kashmir in all your like whatever demands you have to social media companies, because there really aren't many Kashmiris at this moment who can sort of participate, tell their stories, give the data, or approach these companies and tell them like enough is enough. You cannot silence it anymore, because they have themselves silenced themselves thanks to the big tech's complicity with the authoritarian government in India. So we have been like silenced and erased and everything else. Just trying to, but at the same time, people like me, we are just trying to be there and sustain, because this is not just my work, this is not just a PhD degree that I'm doing, it's my life, what I live. Like, this is what happens to me. I'm like in middle of like all of this. So really hoping it's not just for Kashmir, but every other part of the world. Like, nobody deserves to be silenced and oppressed and to be occupied. This is like very imperative, and this is high time that our generation, of course there is technology, it might not always be in our favor, but we make it work in our favor, and try to liberate our stories, at least, so that we can at least tell our stories, and so that our stories are not occupied, so that we are not silenced, and then inshallah hope that one day we'll be free of the oppression and occupation as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ifat, and yeah, thank you so much always, like for always sharing. I think the personal is political, and always sharing like your personal experience. I hope like this is like one of those spaces where we can have like cross-regional conversations and solidarity. I'm interested. We have like 10 minutes left. I'm interested like to hear a few remarks about any existing South-South content moderation, solidarity groups, common efforts when it comes to negotiating or talking, lobbying, influencing the policies of social media companies. But I wanted also to, before these closer remarks, to ask like folks have been like asking questions in the chat. I'm gonna ask just a few of them. Apologize for not answering all of the questions due to the time limit. One of the questions from Alex to you, Mona, is why is an organization that incites and enforces violence daily, and here between like parentheses Israeli government, is not banned by, per meta standards. I think here like content moderation rules.
Rima, I missed your voice for 4 seconds. Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Please. Okay. So the question is, why is an organization that incites and enforces violence daily, the Israeli government, is not banned per meta standards?
Okay, so basically this is the double standards that we are talking about. They have a double standards. They are allowing the Israeli authorities to stay there to justify their violence, their attacks against Palestinians. Over the past year, in May, basically, the Israeli Air Forces pages on Twitter and on Facebook, they were explaining exactly to people how they are targeting and bombing buildings in Gaza Strip. They were they were sharing, tweeting, and posting pictures marking specific buildings that they bombed, and they were explaining how they did that. This is really very violent content that we see in the online platforms. On YouTube, we have observed and we documented an advertisement was ran by the Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs that ad was basically justify why the Israelis or why the Israeli authorities are attacking Gaza Strip. They were just justifying that, giving fake reasons about that. They were saying that they are just attacking military groups, while we saw innocent people, innocent children, women, they were attacked, they were killed, they were basically forcibly displaced from their homes. So we saw that this is not true, while YouTube, they allowed that ad, and in 5 days it gained over than 1,200,000 views and the social on their platform, before they faced a public pressure from activists and from organizations, human rights and digital rights organizations, to take it down. They ended up taking it down, but after 5 days and after gaining over 1,200,000 views, that means that they caused a harm. They led to a real world harm, which they basically talking about when they are moderating our content. Who would compensate Palestinians and other marginalized groups for this harm that basically is affecting us, affecting our narrative, our voices, in a very sensitive times where we are being forcibly expelled from, forcibly displaced from our homes, where we are attacked, bombed, and where basically we are for years now military occupied by the Israelis. No one is compensating us, and that's it. That means that social media and big tech companies, they have to invest more and more money to, first of all, end their digital discrimination against the marginalized groups, to see us as a normal people who have the right to freely express ourselves, and to over-enforce the other people's, the occupiers, the colonizers' content, where they are inciting against violence, where they are doing a real-world harm, where they militarized groups. They are basically, they were organizing and mobilizing themselves using the social media platforms to incite against violence against Palestinians in the mixed cities. And we saw that there was journalistic reports in international mainstream media published talking about that.
I think we lost Mona. Can someone confirm?
Yes, we lost her.
Yeah. We're so sorry, Mona. I think either you're frozen or for some reason your mic is no longer on. Maybe we can move Carolina Ifat with some closing remarks. We actually have just 4 minutes. If you would like to share more about any existing South-South solidarity efforts focused on content moderation, or maybe share with us, a note for the future vision of what kind of collaboration it could be, and that you aspire for.
Thank you very much, Rima. Well, I'm not aware of any such effort, but I would say that right now in in the Organization of American States, specifically the Freedom of Expression Rapporteur, closed a very long term, like for 1 year, they were open for comments, and they had several discussions, and one of the topics was content moderation. So we're expecting anytime soon a document by the Freedom of Expression Rapporteur that will focus on the issue of content moderation. I think this is very interesting because it will allow us to see a multi-stakeholder approach and focus on the region. I believe also that one of the main problems of content moderation is that it's been driven by corporations that try to be global, where very specific local situations happen. And probably as we try to be global and need efforts as the one that you are provoking us, global efforts, we also need local solutions, right? Because situations are different. So how can we do this global, local situation is probably my main question, and I guess will remain unsolved for many time, but something we have to work on. Thank you very much for inviting me and for being among so interesting women around the world. Thank you very much.
I just also want to thank everyone, Hamla, for inviting us, for initiating these conversations. I think this is just the beginning of the long road that we have to take and the long work that we have to do, as much as we expect the rest of the world, the other people, to take up our matters, speak for us. We also have to speak up for each other and take up each other's matters. So I'm very grateful that you could build this space for all of us to come together and talk about the issues that are very important and personal to all of us. I believe personal is always political and political is always personal, something, Rima, that you sort of figured why I always give personal anecdotes. So very grateful for this space. I hope we can do more of this. We can connect more and also lend each other's resources and talents and anything that we can help you with and the work that you are doing. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. And I see Mona has jumped in. Mona, you have 1 minute if you'd like to share closing remarks.
I just want to say that we are closer together. So as much as we are coordinating and mobilizing each other and educating each other and sharing our narrative and our stories and our knowledge with each other, we can become closer and we can make much more impact for our work, and we can change their biased policies. Thank you.
Definitely, 100%.
Thank you so much all. Thank you, Hamla, for this space. And I hope this is just a first meeting. We continue to organize together, inshallah. Take care, everyone. And yeah, feel free to stay in touch in the chat. I'm sure you can answer a few of those questions we didn't get to answer during today's panel. Take care and enjoy.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Thank you to all our speakers. Our next session hosts a group of speakers to discuss how content management mistakes by technology companies affect digital solidarity and the role of digital content